Most people confuse strength with volume. They believe that if they are the loudest voice in the room, the most aggressive negotiator, or the one who reacts first to every provocation, they are displaying power. They are fundamentally mistaken. This is not strength. It is merely a lack of impulse control. True power is not an explosion. It is the silent, calculated weight of an anchor in a storm. Consider the role of the shadow observer. This is the individual who enters a room and immediately detaches from the collective ego. You are there, yet you remain a ghost. You watch the performative displays of dominance, the nervous posturing, the desperate need to be heard, and you see them for what they truly are, clear signals of weakness. When you stop participating in the frantic dance of validation, you stop being a subject of your environment and begin to rule. This transition moves us from the observation of others to the architecture of the self. While the world screams for attention, the psychologically elite have mastered the art of strategic silence. This isn't merely the absence of speech. It is a tactical withdrawal, refusal to leak information, emotion, or intent. When you stop reacting, you become a vacuum that others desperately try to fill with their own insecurities and secrets. You are no longer a participant in the noise. You are the silent center around which the noise orbits. Understand that what follows is not a simple checklist of traits to mimic. It is a map of an internal fortress, a blueprint for a mind that cannot be breached by the common anxieties of the masses. You are entering a private initiation into a higher tier of consciousness, where strength is measured by what you withhold rather than what you display. Prepare to see the world not as it claims to be, but as it truly functions beneath the surface. The 99% are driven by a primitive arc of electricity. A stimulus occurs, and a response immediately follows. If they are insulted, they defend. If they are praised, they preen. This immediacy is their greatest vulnerability. It makes them predictable, and in the world of high-level strategy, predictability is a death sentence. To be psychologically stronger than the masses is to master the Machiavellian discipline of the emotional delay. It is the conscious widening of the gap between what the world does to you and what you do in return. Within this gap specifically, the 3-second pause lies the entirety of your power. While the average person is leaking their internal state through a flared nostril or a defensive retort, the strategic mind uses those 3 seconds to kill the ego. You must view an emotional reaction as a leak in your fortress. Every time you show anger, hurt, or even overexcitement, you are handing a map of your psychological landscape to your opponent. By maintaining a steady, unreadable exterior during a moment of tension, you force the other person to navigate a void. They begin to second-guess their own position because they cannot find a foothold in your emotions. You are no longer a machine that responds when a button is pressed. You are a black hole that absorbs the energy of others without reflection. When the 99% encounter a setback, they experience it as a wound. They bleed out in the form of complaints, resentment, and a desperate search for someone to blame. They are trapped in the victim mindset, where life is something that happens to them. To be psychologically superior is to perform a cold, internal alchemy. You must transform chaos into data. This is the laboratory mindset. When a project fails, a relationship ends, or a betrayal occurs, the elite mind does not ask, "Why is this happening to me?" It asks, "What are the mechanics of this failure?" In this Nietzschean framework, adversity is not a tragedy. It is raw material. It is the fuel for your evolution. By detaching from the emotional sting of a loss, You gain the ability to dissect it, like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. You look for the variables you missed, the psychological blind spots you ignored, and the structural weaknesses in your own strategy. This shift in perspective renders you essentially invincible because there is no longer such a thing as a bad outcome. There are only outcomes that provide more information, while others are paralyzed by the sting of the whip. You are busy analyzing the trajectory of the strike so that it can never land again. You have turned your pain into a private intelligence agency. The 99% are held hostage by a biological ghost, the prehistoric fear of being cast out from the tribe. This manifests in the modern world as a frantic, soul-crushing need to be liked, understood, and validated. They are social prey, constantly adjusting their frequency to match the expectations of those around them. They dilute their personalities, censor their thoughts, and betray their own ambitions just to maintain a fragile sense of belonging. To be psychologically stronger than the masses is to trade this belonging for a profound, cold comfort in being disliked. When you stop fearing the disapproval of others, you effectively remove the leash they hold on your neck. You must view disapproval not as a failure of character, but as a confirmation of your own distinctiveness. If you are moving in a direction that makes the average person uncomfortable, it is often a sign that you have left the herd behind. This is the social predator dynamic, not in the sense of causing harm, but in the sense of possessing an unshakable frame that others cannot penetrate, while the 99% are busy begging for a seat at the table. The strong individual is comfortable standing alone in the dark, knowing that their value is not subject to a public vote. You do not seek to be understood by those who lack the depth to perceive you. The 99% are not only held captive by criticism, they are equally enslaved by praise. When you rely on the applause of the crowd to feel successful, you have handed the keys to your internal kingdom to a fickle and emotional mob. The psychologically elite operate on a different frequency. They build what the Stoics called the inner citadel, a mental fortress that remains unaffected by the weather of public opinion. Whether the world crowns you a king or casts you as a villain, the walls of the citadel do not move. You must become your own highest judge, developing a private standard of excellence that is far more demanding than anything society could impose upon you. This quiet confidence is often mistaken for arrogance, but it is actually a form of ultimate detachment. You listen to feedback only as a mechanic listens to an engine, to identify friction, not to seek emotional fulfillment. When you achieve a victory, you do not look around for a standing ovation. You simply acknowledge that the internal plan was executed correctly and move to the next objective. By severing the neural link between external approval and internal worth, you become a ghost to those who try to manipulate you through flattery. You are no longer a performer on a stage. You are the architect in the wings, watching a play that you no longer feel the need to star in the age of the algorithm. The human attention span has been systematically dismantled. The 99% live in a perpetual now, driven by the frantic pursuit of the next notification, the next trend, and the next hit of instant dopamine. They are psychologically tethered to the immediate. Because they cannot see past the current week, they are easily manipulated by those who can see across the decade. To be psychologically stronger than the masses is to possess a rare psychological mutation, the ability to engage in long-form thinking. This is the strategic patience of Sun Tzu, who understood that the battle is often won by the commander, who can simply outweight the enemy's impulsivity. When you commit to a goal that requires years of silent, invisible labor, You are operating on a timeline that the average person cannot even comprehend. They will look at your lack of immediate results and label it as failure. They will see your stillness and call it stagnation. You must let them, while they are busy chasing the flickering lights of short-term gains. You are laying the foundation for a structural victory. True strength is the capacity to endure the boring middle of a long-term plan without the need for external encouragement. You aren't playing the same game as the 99%. They are playing a round of checkers that ends in minutes. You are playing a grand strategy game where the first move was made months ago and the checkmate is still 3 years away. Blaise Pascal once remarked that all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. The 99% are terrified of silence because, in the absence of noise, they are forced to confront the vacuum of their own minds. They use boredom as a trigger for escape, reaching for their phones the moment a conversation lulls or a task becomes tedious. They are controlled by a physiological need for stimulation, which makes them easy to distract and even easier to lead. To be psychologically stronger is to do the opposite. You must learn to weaponize boredom. You must develop the capacity to remain perfectly still in a world that is vibrating with anxiety. When you can sit in a room alone without distraction, you are no longer a slave to the environment. You become the observer of the patterns that others miss because they are too busy consuming content to notice the structure of the world around them. While the masses are drowning in a sea of irrelevant information, you are using the stillness to map out the board. You notice the subtle shifts in human behavior, the hidden motivations in a negotiation, and the cracks in a competitor's armor. Stillness is not inactivity. It is high-definition perception. By mastering your internal restlessness, you gain the clarity to see the move that ends the game before your opponent even knows they are playing. The 99% pride themselves on being good people, but in reality, they are merely harmless. They confuse their lack of options with a presence of virtue, because they lack the stomach for conflict, the skill for manipulation, or the strength to impose their will. They adopt a persona of kindness as a defense mechanism. This is a hollow morality. To be psychologically stronger than 99% of the population, you must undergo the Jungian process of shadow integration. You must acknowledge, with cold and unflinching clarity, your own capacity for malice, for calculated destruction, and for strategic ruthlessness. True strength is the dangerous man. Archetype, an individual who has sharpened his claws, understands exactly how to use them, and yet chooses to keep them sheathed. There is no moral weight in the behavior of a sheep. The sheep has no choice but to be a sheep. The moral weight belongs to the wolf who chooses to guard the gate. When you accept your shadow, you stop being a victim of your own repressed urges and start using that dark energy as a source of grounded, unshakable power. You are no longer afraid of the world because you have met the monster within yourself and put it on a leash. This is the ultimate intellectual hook. True. Peace is only possible for those who are prepared for war. The 99% are obsessed with authenticity, a word they use to justify their own rigidity. They believe that having a fixed, unchanging personality is a sign of integrity, when in reality it is a psychological cage. By committing to a single public image, they become predictable targets for anyone who understands their patterns. To be psychologically stronger is to embrace the Machiavellian concept of the fluid self. You must view your persona not as a concrete statue, but as a garment, something to be chosen, worn, and discarded based on the strategic requirements of the moment. Consistency is a trap for the weak. It is the hobgoblin of little minds. The strong understand that to survive and thrive in a shifting landscape, one must be able to mirror the environment without being absorbed by it. You can play the role of the humble student, the aggressive leader, or the invisible clerk, all while maintaining an untouched, diamond-hard core that remains separate from the performance. This is the ultimate weapon of the strategist, the ability to change shape, so completely that your opponents are left fighting a shadow. You are not being fake. You are being effective. While the masses are busy trying to find themselves, you are busy creating the versions of yourself necessary to win. With this realization comes a cold, sharpening weight, the burden of the elite. Once you have integrated your shadow and mastered the fluidity of your persona, you no longer have the luxury of ignorance. You can see the invisible threads of manipulation that pull at the 99%, and you can see the frailty of the structures they lean on for comfort. Strength of this magnitude is not a trophy to be displayed. It is a heavy, silent responsibility. The world is a chaotic theater of competing wills, and most are simply victims of the script. But you have stepped out of the audience. The final sign of your psychological superiority is not how you use this power to dominate, but how you use it to remain unmoved. As we close this initiation, a final question remains, echoing in the silence of your internal fortress, now that you are no longer a subject of the world's whims. What will you choose to build in the space where your fear used to live? The air in the room has changed. The words we have navigated together were not designed for the masses. They were crafted for the few who can withstand the cold clarity of the truth. Most who began this journey have already retreated into the comfort of their old distractions, unable to bear the mirror we have held up to the human soul. But you are still here. This silence that remains after the storm of realization is your new home. It is the quiet of the strategist before the first move is made, the stillness of the architect before the foundation is laid. You now possess a map that the 99% will never see, a set of keys to doors they do not even know exist. This knowledge is exclusive not because it is hidden, but because it requires a level of internal discipline that most find repulsive. You have looked into the shadow and found a source of light. The temptation now is to perform, to go out into the world and announce your new strength through posturing or debate. Resist this. True psychological superiority is a silent frequency, not a broadcast. If you feel the need to prove these signs to others, you are still a prisoner of their validation. The final threshold of the elite is the ability to possess power without the craving to display it. Let your strength be the invisible floor beneath your feet and the unshakable calm in your eyes as you return to the noise of the 99%. Do so as an observer, not a participant. Carry this map within you, knowing that while others are lost in the storm of their own impulses, you have already built your lighthouse. You are no longer waiting for permission to be powerful. You simply are. The world hasn't changed, but you have won in the game of shadows. That is the only move that matters.